Hello, here today we are talking about 12 Angry Men, filmed in 1957. Here with Grace Novak,
Zach Krieger,
Tony Spampanato,
and Morgan Sullivan.
12 Angry Men is a film that sums up to be 12 men voting on whether or not an 18-year-old boy is guilty or not guilty on the account of a premeditated murder towards his father. The men have to decide unanimously on whether or not the boy is guilty or not guilty. If they decide he is guilty, he will be sentenced to death in the electric chair. Otherwise, he will be acquitted.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note how they bring about showing how that's the whole setting of the movie, because it's very simple, but it's very effective. We come in and you see a big panning shot of the entire courtroom, and we see a sign that says this is a courthouse. Mm-hmm. We see the woman outside who just gave her testimony, and we don't even know it yet, but that's going to be a big part of the plot. And then we see the inside of the courtroom, and within the first 5 minutes, the judge has already said basically what you just said.
Yeah.
So we have the entire movie set up right in the very beginning, done really well, without really even saying much. It was very...
Yeah. We don't even get the backstory from watching the jury trial. It's just by however the jury's opinions or the facts that they state. Mm-hmm. And that is where the audience forms their own opinion if he's guilty or not guilty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the audience is like a fly on the wall in the room. Mm-hmm. Like you're going along with it in time as time's going on with them.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure there aren't any actual like cuts. In time.
Yeah, there's not.
Yeah, everything goes along the way it does in the movie. Like it's in real time, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and then the movie's also filmed in black and white, which gives it definitely more rough and like cut and dry type feel.
Yeah. Starker contrast between the characters and the shadows and light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brings out certain features like their distress and sweat and stuff, whether or not they're sweating.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a major theme of the entire
sweat?
movie. Yeah, which is weird, but it's...
I mean, they also stated like, oh, it's one of the hottest days yet, and then it's, raining, the fan doesn't work. Things are just kind of creating more and more tension from like outside sources into the room.
Yeah, and that builds a lot into the setting because they really, like, you can feel how tense it is in the room. And everyone knows what a really intense, hot day feels like, or even being stuck in one room on a really hot, intense day. And you can just imagine they already were probably so irritable, just wanting to go home.
Long day.
And they do that. They use the setting to establish the mood of the room almost, Later in the movie when it starts to take a turn and jurors start becoming more open-minded about some of the possibilities of the case, they close the windows, it starts raining, the setting overall has a decreased temperature.
Yeah.
And the fan turns on, that sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely think that's interesting how they use the setting to really like contribute that way.
Yeah, I like your decrease of temperature with the people as well, not only the actual temperature.
Yeah.
Of just the anger boiling. So let's talk about the first scene that really stood out is when they all started turning their back towards which juror?
That was juror 10.
Juror 10?
Yeah, juror 10.
Yeah, so just to establish, this scene is probably about 2/3 through the movie. Juror number 10 starts going on a rant stating that the verdict needs to be not guilty based on the, is it the defendant? Or the boy?
No, it needs to be guilty.
Yeah, that it needs to be guilty. That the verdict needs to be guilty. The boy needs to be sentenced to death based on his race. The boy was a minority.
He never explicitly says that it's because of his race, but he refers a lot to these people. He says they're violent by nature. He's using a lot of prejudice rhetoric without straight up saying this kid's Mexican. We should put him to death.
Yeah. And then he, as he's going on this rant, the jurors slowly start to all turn their backs.
But
and
well, they're also sitting at the table. They stand
Yeah.
up
yeah, they
and
start
like
to
take a
stand
step
up,
away.
Yeah.
step away, and then turn their backs towards juror number 10 as he goes on this rant about said these people and why he's guilty.
Yeah, and something that I found interesting too is that the juror number 3, who I think at this point there were only, what was it, 3 or 4 people who were still voting guilty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of those was juror number 3, and then juror number 10, the one who was going on a rant. And it seemed like the two of them, were kind of on the same page. They both were hot-headed right from the get-go. They were very opinionated, very stubborn. Like, out of all of them, I think they were on the highest end of that spectrum in terms of people's stubbornness and anger and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But even juror 3 stood up and like
He was
turned
one
his
of the
back
first
to him.
people.
Yeah, he walked
He
to the
was like
window.
one of the first people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree with you. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because, like, it was like, I felt like that was just sort of the artist. Like, juror number 10 had been previously brought up that juror number 10 might have some prejudices against minorities. But at this point, juror number 10, like, starts to become more straightforward about, like, these minority people are all guilty.
Well,
And,
I think the whole thing is that
yeah.
in the beginning of the movie, throughout the movie, we see Juror 10 using this rhetoric a lot.
Yeah.
And I think everybody just kind of assumes, since he's in with the larger group, he's with the majority of voting for guilty, that everybody assumes that he's got to have some other idea of why this kid is guilty. They just assume that he's on the same page
Yeah.
as everybody. But then they realize when he's talking, this is the only reason why he wants to put this kid away.
Yeah.
He's not really
Yeah.
thinking of anything else. He's old, he's sick, he's set in his ways,
Yeah.
and he's too cognitively biased to just look at it any other way.
Yeah.
And by everybody standing up and turning away, that's the only way he can realize, like, they're not on my side.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure he was thinking, oh, everybody's on my side.
Yeah.
Because nobody explicitly tells him that they disagree with him. Nobody turns away. Nobody starts ignoring him.
Yeah.
He's just kind of assuming everybody's on the same page, and then he realizes that he's not.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to also look at the time period, because this is film 57. So, there was still so much like racial struggle. This is like, right at the 60s.
Yeah.
Where everyone hated everybody, and like just tensions arise between races, but it's also like right on the cusp of that, but it's pre like war on drugs, pre Get Tough movement,
Pre-civil rights movement.
pre civil
Yeah.
rights, like
And this is still like the address, like this is still like the artist's way, I feel like, of addressing this issue.
yeah.
Because,
like,
this
there's a
cultural
line.
issue. Yeah, he establishes the line, and like it's interesting because at this point, not only do the jurors were all very confrontational in their disagreements, and this is the real disagreement where they take a very non-confrontational approach and they shun him, and almost at this point in the movie, juror number 10 sits at a completely separate table.
Yeah.
And there is like a large amount of guilt and like negative connotation that is like established and associated with like that sort of like him like verbalizing those beliefs,
Yeah, and it plays into the whole theme of the movie.
Yeah. And
which is prejudice coming into the judicial system and basically making a muck of the whole system.
Yeah.
in
like-
the Slant magazine, they had a summary online about this, and one of the main points that stood out to them was at the very end, one of the jurors stands up and he says, "Prejudice always obscures the truth."
Yes.
Yeah, and that's basically it's the whole movie, kind of.
Yeah.
Really.
It's like the like pull like away from like a selfishness and like stop being like so involved in your own stubbornness and your own masculinity. And like I feel like that's a very important, that's a theme almost in the movie, is like masculinity and stubbornness and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's 12 Angry Men. It's not 12 Angry
It's
Women.
like
or
that's a
12
very
angry
clear blunt
Yeah.
like thing. So
Well, and I think something really good about this movie is it speaks a lot about communication.
Yeah.
And when you think about, in terms of filmmaking, how do we show the audience anger? And the whole movie, you know, they're loud, they're grumpy, they have like these intense looks on their faces, they yell, they interrupt each other, but this is like one scene in the movie where everyone is quiet
Yeah.
while this man is just ranting, spewing his whatever.
So, yeah.
Also, just showing how people are angry, bouncing off that. I think the acting was really fantastic in the sense that everybody just looked agitated. Everybody's body language, everybody was gripping at their collars,
Rolling up their sleeves.
rolling up their sleeves.
Taking off their jackets.
Yeah.
Like,
I thought the smoking was actually really interesting
Yes.
too,
Yes.
because this was the 50s. Everybody smoked.
except for during number 1.
Yeah, no, he never smoked.
Because he even like made a point because the salesman kept smoking in his face, and during number 1 was like
No.
getting mad at him.
He's
Yeah.
like, hey, like.
So the people who weren't smoking were getting agitated because the people who
And
were
even,
smoking.
Even that, it's kind of a representation of like people's boundaries. Like he's
Yeah.
smoking and he's not thinking about anybody else. He's just thinking about, oh, I want to smoke my cigarette as he's blowing the smoke in this
Right,
other man's
yeah.
face.
Exactly, and like during number 12 showed like a very like selfish, very like entitled type of personality.
Yeah.
He like within the first few minutes of the movie, he like said that he was a salesman like 6 times.
Yeah.
He worked
So-
in advertising.
Or advertising,
Yeah.
yes. It was the other guy who was
How
the
could you
salesman.
forget it? He said it like 8
I
times.
know. Terrible. So, but like another scene, like it's interesting though because like the final scene, you know, like the most stubborn character during number 3, you know, in the final scene he like breaks down. You know, he during number 3 is the one who votes. Is the final one to like switch, and like he like breaks down and he tears up that picture of his son, you know.
Well, I think the reason why he had such a breakdown and why it was so hard to break through to him is because his prejudices were the most personal to him.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was a lot of race, there was a lot of just their biases weren't even set in anything. Like for example, the salesman guy, juror number 7, he just wanted to go to a baseball game. He really didn't think either way about Mexican people or
Yeah.
people who grew up in slums. He just wanted to go to a baseball game. But
Yeah.
this guy, he was looking at it not as the kid's race or where the kid came from. He was looking at it as an 18-year-old.
kid, yeah.
Where he basically
So,
was
like-
looking at him like it was his son.
So you're just
Yeah.
angry at his own son
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
he-
wanting to punish
yeah,
the
exactly.
defendant for it.
And something that stuck out to me with that is there's a juror 3 tells this story about his son and how, you know, he said, I said to myself about my son, I'm going to make a man out of you.
Yeah.
And then when he turned 16, he punched me. And or 16 or 18 or whatever, he punched me, and I
Yeah.
hadn't seen him in 2 years. And it's like, oh, well, look at the man you did make him. You made
Yeah,
him an
exactly.
angry, violent
Just
person.
like you.
Yeah, and then like minutes later, they start discussing the case, and you know, one of the guys is going over just, you know, parts of it, and he's saying how he slaps his dad, and the guy next to him says, oh, it wasn't a slap, it was a punch. A punch is very different from a slap.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, I just like connected those two things in my brain.
Yeah. They like the importance of it.
Yeah.
They take a moment to establish like the importance of the punch
Yeah.
by saying like a punch is very significant compared to a slap.
Which I thought was great that they got into that, because in the very beginning of the movie, everybody was very focused on like, oh, let's not get muddled up in facts. Let's not like overanalyze all this stuff. And then by this point in the movie, they're like, wait, was it a punch or was it a slap? And they're all in on it.
Yeah.
Like basically juror 8, which I feel like we haven't even talked about him that much at all yet.
Yeah.
And he's like the most important one in the movie.
Yeah, juror number 8 is the first one who, juror number 8 initially, against all other jurors, votes not guilty. And he does this, he states clearly, even though some of the jurors don't pick up on it, that he doesn't believe the guy is not guilty. And he doesn't know if the guy is guilty. He simply feels that there needs to be time and discussion on, because death is in question.
He has
immediately
empathy.
He immediately sees value in this young man's life.
And takes on the emotional, more like, you know.
Yeah. Whereas all the other men just kind of look at the value in
their
themselves,
own lives.
and that's it.
Well,
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are like that. I think most of the guys though are kind of just want to get out of there and want to go
Yeah.
along with the group and think, oh well, if everybody else is in agreement,
Yeah.
why shouldn't I? Like for
Yeah.
example, Juror 5, he was the one who grew up in the slums. He was, in
Yeah.
my mind, should have been biased towards this kid. He should have
Yes.
been the one who wanted to hear this kid out.
Yeah.
But I think he was embarrassed about
Yeah.
bringing up that fact
Yeah.
about himself, and he didn't want people thinking that
Yeah.
he was
Well,
biased
because
towards him.
they were also even kind of like, once they, like, he brought to the table that he grew up in similar situations, people kind of poked at him. You know?
Well, it was
Yeah.
like he brought it up right after one of the jurors, I don't recall which one, had just said that this kid is, I think it might have been juror number 10, he had said that this kid grew up in the slums, that people who grow up in the slums are criminals or prone to crime.
Yeah, and he had to bring
Yeah.
up the fact that he was.
Yeah,
grew
he's
up in a
like,
slum
and he's like, I'm saying right here, I grew up in the slums, and I paint, or like I lay
Yeah.
bricks. I lay bricks.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like kill people with knives.
Yeah, like slowly but surely, you start to learn how, like, these men, they all feel very significant, and you realize that in a sense, their backgrounds and things like that kind of do make them significant. And even the man who came from the slums, and he was kind of embarrassed about it at first, but then I think he kind of embraced it in a sense.
Yeah.
He was like, because eventually he got kind of mad, and he's like, you can't talk to me like that,
Yeah.
you know. And it's the same deal with the young boy who's put on trial. Is they're taking his experiences, his life, where he's come from, and
Yeah,
they're using
like
it
he's
to label
abused
him in
and
these-
yeah. Yeah, and it's like so like, I mean, you could go as far to say like the artist's main point, or like the main thing was to get the main point of this movie was to like establish that, like, you know, learning to take your perspective and your prejudices and use them properly and use them with integrity and use them clearly, and like then like also like don't let your prejudices come into like how they affect our justice system and like our, you know, all of that.
Yeah, because Juror 5, he was the only one who had any information and actually knew about where this kid was coming from. Everybody else had grew up, you know, in
Yeah.
nicer areas, and he was the one when they brought out the switchblade, and he was like, oh, everybody, you know,
Yeah.
this is how I would stab a man who was 7 inches taller than me. It was
Yeah.
a great scene, by the way, but he was the only one who was like, nobody uses a switchblade like that. It's
Yeah,
stupid.
he's like,
Like,
come
you
on,
use it underhanded.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of the knife. Like,
getting a switchblade. You know, and yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think you could say this movie was about not like don't have prejudices, because I think it's more about like how your prejudices affect you, and like how they
And
affect
other people's.
how they affect other people.
Acknowledge prejudices,
Accept
but don't let
them.
it control. how
Yes.
you
Exactly.
view people.
And even I hate to bringing it back to like the last scene with the juror number 3. IMDb
Uh-huh.
does a really swell job of kind of laying it out on like who's talking, and you know it transcribes. You know he's like yelling at all the other jurors, but then he stops. He looks at the picture of of his son on the table, and he says, "Rotten kids, you work your life out." And he's talking to his son, the picture. So he the whole time he just only wanted his son to work his life out and punish him rather than punish the defendant.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a little bit too at the end, he kind of, like, obviously there has to be an underlying of guilt for himself. You know, he
Yeah.
blames himself. He's angry at himself. He realizes, oh my gosh, maybe I didn't go about this the right way. Like I tried to, you know, I'm this grown man and I tried to make a good man out of my son, but I screwed it up. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't even talk to me now, you know.
Yeah, he let like his prejudices were like personal and masculine almost, you know. Like he said word for word, I'm gonna make a man out of my son, or like I'm gonna make a man out of him in that moment.
Which I think is a huge theme of the movie is
Yeah.
just men and how men
Yep.
behave and
Yeah.
how it's kind of a problem.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
all we want to do is we have all this bravado and we have all this chest puffing and we have all these, like, I mean, there was like there were like 4 almost fights in the movie, maybe like 3, where people actually,
Yeah.
Juror 3 almost attacked Juror 8 and said,
couple
I'm gonna
times.
kill you, I'm gonna kill you. And that was also a great scene because it brought it back, holes in his arguments where he was like, you don't
Yeah.
actually mean you're gonna kill me, do you?
Well, and that's where I think the movie, like, you can really give, like, props to the creativity of the movie at
Oh, yeah.
that point, because, like, I mean, like you, the characters slowly, all those who felt he was guilty, all those who were so confident, slowly the most confident individuals contradict themselves. Like juror number 3 saying he was going to kill juror number 8, and juror number 8 said to juror number 3, are you serious though? Like
Yeah.
he questioned it, and then juror number 3 is like, oh. Or like another juror picks up a knife and says, see, he took this knife right here and killed his father with it. And juror number 8 says, no,
That's not the right knife.
that's the knife I bought for like $6 or something like
Yeah.
that.
2 blocks from his house.
That's identical to the murder weapon.
Which I thought was great too, because I think that kind of explains really. I think Juror 8, I think he was really given it a really soft sell. They even say
Yes.
when he's in the bathroom with Juror number 7, the salesman, he says, you're really good at the soft sell.
The soft sell,
Because
yeah.
He could have just came in and been like, hey, I found this knife, there's no way. That could have been the first thing he said, and people would have been like, what is this? But he gives it some time. He lets people
Yes.
discuss. He lets people really show that they believe this evidence.
Right.
And then that's when he pulls out the knife.
Well,
And he's showing like things are not always black and white.
Yes.
Like you're all sitting here saying you're so certain about this knife, but here I am. I'm gonna prove you wrong right here.
and it's interesting because, like, you know, I feel like juror number 8 and juror number 9, you know, the book talks about how framing is really important. Juror number 8 and juror number 9 are always framed together, and then it also in the book Looking Out Movies, it points out how lighting, juror number 8 and juror number 9, they both like were lighter. Even in the black and white film, that crisp, that dark, there was more light shining on their
Yeah.
face. That really shows how like they have more of that like holy roll, not holy roll, but like the. Do you guys get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
He's
like
like
Yeah.
he was this
the white.
wise
They
man.
wear the white cap
Yeah.
Yeah.
almost like. And you know that's kind of like they're like the artists portraying himself, like using
Listen to him.
them to get his ideas out there to say use your prejudices properly. You know, like don't let them get in the way of these things. You know, don't let them get in the way of like the beauty and like it's interesting how yeah. Well, I mean, we don't even have to go into that, but
But yeah, this movie, I mean, not only, I mean, it was filmed in 57, but still to this day, jurors act the same. It's still prevalent, and you can take away from your own life, especially if you ever get called on jury duty.
Which I have, and yeah, I related to this movie a lot because when you go to jury duty, you're just kind of like, I don't want to be here. Everybody's
Yeah.
tired. Everybody's complaining about being there.
Tired, it's so long. Like,
Yes.
You just have to sit there and like give your 110% focus. But
And the system's not even
hard.
set up very well.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
most of the time when you get called on jury duty, you don't even serve. By the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
you do get called to serve, you've been waiting around for hours.
yeah, and you don't even get like, if you're on jury, sometimes it takes hours and hours until you get like a potty break.
Yeah.
You don't like it's so hard to focus, and I think you can definitely see how agitated and they're just ready to be done.
Yeah, at a certain point, I feel like this movie is just at a base level a protest to the judicial system in the United
Yeah.
States. Like,
Yeah.
if you could really sum up this movie, it would be just a protest to how we do things in America.
We may have
Yeah.
one of the best systems in the world, but that doesn't
I mean, it's
take
perfect.
away that
And
it needs improvement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
and like even not just our judicial system but our own like our own how we see things, you know. And it's interesting because you can further prove your guys' idea with the international perspective that was brought by the foreign juror number 11, you know.
So yeah, again, here we are. 12 Angry Men, filmed in 1957, directed by Sidney Lumet. I'm Grace Novak.
Zach Krieger.
This is Tony Spampanato.
And Morgan Sullivan.
Thank you for listening.